Welcome to one of the most unsettling and mysterious cases ever recorded in Alabama's history. Before we begin, I invite you to share in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're always curious to see how far these forgotten accounts travel and at what strange hours they reach their listeners. It was the autumn of 1851 when the county records of Montgomery, Alabama, first noted something unusual. The Willow Creek plantation, owned by the widow Elizabeth Caldwell, reported a harvest nearly 30% larger than any other estate in the region. Despite employing far fewer field hands than her neighbors, the entry might have been dismissed as a clerical anomaly, buried forever in courthouse archives, if not for what transpired that winter. In the county ledger, a single cryptic line appeared: "Inquiry requested into unusual activity at Willow Creek Plantation. Denied due to insufficient cause." No explanation followed. No follow-up investigation was ever recorded. The Caldwell estate stood 15 miles outside Montgomery, resting on a quiet bend of the Alabama River where the current ran slow and heavy with silt. The main house, built in 1798, was among the earliest great homes of the territory, a proud structure of white columns and long verandas, now faded and crumbling beneath a cloak of ivy. But what set Willow Creek apart from every other plantation in the region wasn't its architecture, or even its land, it was its mistress. Elizabeth Caldwell became sole owner of the estate at just 27, following the sudden death of her husband, Thomas Caldwell, in the spring of 1849. The cause listed brain fever. Yet those who knew the Caldwells spoke of tension long before his illness. Servants whispered of arguments behind closed doors, of strange lights in the fields after midnight, and of voices carried across the river long after the house had gone dark. The marriage had produced no children. Those who knew the couple noted that Thomas had been a brutally efficient plantation owner, infamous for his harsh treatment of the 53 enslaved people who worked his cotton fields. Elizabeth, by contrast, had been largely invisible during their marriage, a pale, quiet woman who rarely attended social functions and was rumored to spend most of her time in the plantation's extensive library. After Thomas's death, neighboring plantation owners expected the widow to sell the property or at minimum hire an overseer. She did neither. Instead, according to tax records from 1850, she reduced her enslaved workforce to 38, selling 15 men to a plantation further south. The remaining workers were primarily women, children, and older men. Despite this reduction, production at Willow Creek did not decline. In fact, according to shipping manifests filed at the Montgomery dock, cotton yields increased by 20% that first year after Thomas's death. Montgomery society largely ignored the widow. She attended church infrequently, declined invitations to social gatherings, and was described by those who encountered her as unremarkable and withdrawn to the point of rudeness. The minister's wife noted in her personal correspondence that Elizabeth's demeanor had changed notably after Thomas's death. "She carries herself differently now," wrote Margaret Holcomb to her sister in Virginia. "There is something in her eyes that wasn't there before, a certainty perhaps, or something colder." What happened at Willow Creek Plantation between 1849 and 1851 remains largely speculative, pieced together from fragmentary records, diary entries, and the single most important document, the Journal of Dr. Samuel Whittaker, discovered in 1963 during the renovation of what had once been his office in downtown Montgomery. According to Whittaker's journal, he was summoned to Willow Creek on December 12, 1850, to attend to what Elizabeth described as a matter requiring medical discretion. Whittaker, who had been Thomas Caldwell's physician, noted his surprise at finding the plantation in excellent order, the house immaculately maintained, despite Elizabeth having dismissed half of the house servants. "The widow Caldwell appears transformed," he wrote. "Where once she seemed perpetually frightened, she now exudes a calm authority that is rather remarkable in a woman of her station managing alone." Whittaker's journal becomes increasingly disturbing with subsequent entries. He describes being asked to bring medical supplies to treat injuries of a concerning nature without being permitted to see the patients. Elizabeth explained that several of her field hands had been injured in a farm accident, but insisted on treating them herself under the doctor's guidance. Whittaker noted that the supplies requested, bandages, laudanum, pacuses for infection, and splints for broken bones, suggested injuries more severe than typical field accidents would produce. Most telling is Whittaker's account of what he observed while waiting in Elizabeth's study on his third visit to the plantation. "While the widow prepared the treatments as I had instructed her, He wrote, "I noticed a peculiar draft coming from behind the bookcase. Upon closer examination, I discovered that the entire shelf could be moved, revealing what appeared to be a narrow staircase descending below the house. Before I could investigate further, Mrs. Caldwell returned. The look that crossed her face when she saw me near the bookcase haunts me still. For a moment, just a moment, I believed she might do me harm." The doctor's next entry, dated January 18, 1851, reads only, "I have made a grave error in judgment. God forgive me for what I now know, and have agreed not to reveal what happened beneath Willow Creek Plantation." The archaeological record provides fragmentary evidence. In 1967, a structural assessment of the remaining foundation revealed an extensive network of rooms beneath the main house, spaces that appeared on no original architectural plans. The rooms, according to the report filed by historian Martin Granger, showed evidence of long-term habitation, including primitive sleeping arrangements, cooking facilities, and an ingenious ventilation system that would have prevented smoke or cooking odors from being detected above ground. Most significantly, Greer's team discovered a narrow tunnel leading from the underground rooms to the riverbank, concealed by a natural formation of willow roots and underbrush. The tunnel would have allowed people to enter or exit the plantation unseen from the main road or neighboring properties. The county census of 1850 lists 38 enslaved individuals at Willow Creek, yet shipping records from the Cotton Exchange indicate that the labor required to produce the documented harvest would have required at least 60 workers. The discrepancy was noted by a tax assessor named James Harrove, who made an unannounced visit to Willow Creek in February of 1851. Hargrove's official report indicates nothing unusual about the plantation. He confirmed the presence of 37 enslaved workers, one having died since the previous census, and noted that the widow Caldwell appears to be managing her inheritance with unexpected competence. However, a personal letter discovered in 1959, sent by Harrove to his brother in Tennessee, tells a different story. "I cannot shake the strangeness of what I observed at Willow Creek," Harrove wrote. "The fields were immaculately tended, yet I counted no more than 20 individuals working them during my day-long inspection. The production numbers simply don't align with the visible workforce." When I inquired about this discrepancy, the widow invited me to inspect the slave quarters, which I did. Everything appeared in order, though I noted the cabins seemed to house fewer people than would be expected. Most troubling was the behavior of the enslaved people themselves. They moved with a curious coordination, as though performing a dance they had carefully rehearsed. None would meet my eye. When I questioned one woman directly, she stared at the ground and said only, "Mistress takes good care of those who work hard." The emphasis she placed on those has remained with me. It suggested something I cannot quite articulate. Harrove concluded his letter with an observation that would prove prophetic. "I do not believe I saw the entirety of Willow Creek's operation. There is something beneath the surface there, perhaps literally so. I have requested permission to conduct a more thorough investigation, though I doubt it will be granted. The Caldwell name still carries weight in Montgomery, and there are many who would prefer not to look too closely at the widow's affairs." Indeed, no further official investigation was conducted. Hargrove himself died 3 months later of what was recorded as heart failure, though no previous health concerns had been documented. The most compelling piece of evidence regarding what may have occurred at Willow Creek comes from an unexpected source. The journal of Abigail Foster, the 18-year-old daughter of a neighboring plantation owner. In entries spanning from October 1850 to March 1851, Abigail describes increasingly bizarre observations about the Caldwell plantation. "Father insists I accompany him on his visits to Widow Caldwell," she wrote in November. "He believes she requires a feminine influence, though I suspect his interest is more matrimonial than paternal. The widow is not what I expected. She speaks little, but observes much. Her house is unnaturally quiet. Twice now I've heard sounds that should not exist, voices where there should be none, movement in rooms that are supposedly empty. Today, while waiting in the parlor, I distinctly heard children laughing beneath the floorboards. When I mentioned this to Mrs. Caldwell, she explained that the acoustics of old houses can play tricks, and that I likely heard the kitchen staff's children playing outside, but there were no children visible when we later walked the grounds. By January, Abigail's entries reflect growing unease. Mrs. Caldwell invited me to take tea with her alone today. Father was pleased, thinking she has taken a liking to me. I am less certain. Throughout our conversation, she asked pointed questions about my father's habits, the layout of our home, his business dealings. Most strange was her interest in our cellar and whether it connects to any other parts of the house. She has invited me to return next week to see her library, which she claims contains several volumes of poetry that might interest me. I find I do not wish to go, though I cannot explain why. The final entry regarding Willow Creek, dated March 12th, is the most disturbing. I have seen what lies beneath. God help me, I have seen it, and I can never unsee it. Miss Caldwell knows that I know the look that passed between us. I believe she is deciding whether I can be trusted or whether I too must disappear. The journal ends abruptly. According to family records, Abigail was sent to relatives in Philadelphia the following week, supposedly for educational opportunities. She never returned to Alabama. What exactly did Abigail see beneath Willow Creek Plantation? The historical record provides no definitive answer, but contextual evidence suggests a possibility that would have been shocking for its time. The period between 1849 and 1851 saw an increase in Underground Railroad activity throughout the South. Montgomery itself was known to have several abolitionist sympathizers working in secret to assist enslaved people seeking freedom in the North. A ledger discovered in 1960 in a hidden compartment of Elizabeth's writing desk contains what appears to be a coded record of individuals. 25 names represented only by initials accompanied by dates and cryptic notations such as R-bound or C-bound, possibly referring to routes toward the Ohio River or Canada. If Elizabeth Caldwell was indeed harboring runaway slaves beneath her plantation while simultaneously maintaining her position in Southern society, it would represent one of the most audacious and dangerous double lives ever documented. The operational logistics of such an arrangement would have been extraordinarily complex and perilous. How did Elizabeth feed these additional people without arousing suspicion? How did she coordinate their movements? Most importantly, how did she maintain secrecy among her own enslaved workers, some of whom must have been aware of what was happening beneath the main house? Partial answers may lie in the remarkable economic records Elizabeth maintained. Accounting books show regular purchases of supplies in quantities that would have seemed excessive for the number of people officially residing at Willow Creek. More telling are the payments made to riverboat captains, small but regular sums that could have facilitated the transportation of people along the waterways that connected to the Underground Railroad's southern routes. The human dynamics at Willow Creek would have been extraordinarily complex. The enslaved workers who remained after Thomas's death appear to have formed an unusual alliance with Elizabeth. Several accounts from neighboring plantations note that Elizabeth's workers demonstrated unusual loyalty, refusing offers of better positions elsewhere. This suggests they may have been willing participants in whatever operation she was running, perhaps motivated by the promise of eventually gaining their own freedom or helping family members escape. What ultimately happened to Elizabeth Caldwell and her underground operation? The historical record becomes murkier in the spring of 1851. County records indicate that Elizabeth sold Willow Creek Plantation in April of that year to a businessman from New Orleans. She disappeared from Alabama society entirely with no further documentation of her whereabouts in any official capacity. However, a letter discovered in 1958 in the archives of an abolitionist society in Boston makes reference to a Southern widow of means who has rendered extraordinary service to the cause of liberation at great personal risk, and who is now settled in our community under a name not her own. The letter dated July 1851 provides no further identifying details, but the timing aligns with Elizabeth's disappearance from Alabama. The fate of those who may have been hidden beneath Willow Creek remains largely unknown. No mass grave or evidence of violence was ever discovered on the property. This suggests that if Elizabeth was indeed harboring runaway slaves, she may have succeeded in helping them escape rather than being discovered and stopped. The story might have remained completely buried had it not been for a discovery made during the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Construction workers renovating what had once been the Montgomery Courthouse uncovered a sealed wall compartment containing a single document, a warrant for the arrest of Elizabeth Caldwell on charges of theft of property and incitement to insurrection, capital crimes in 1851 Alabama. The warrant was dated April 10th, just days before Elizabeth sold the plantation. It had never been executed. A notation on the back of the warrant, written in what handwriting experts later identified as belonging to the county sheriff, reads simply, "Some matters are better left undisturbed. The widow has departed. Let this depart with her." What happened at Willow Creek Plantation between 1849 and 1851 will never be fully known. The remaining physical evidence was destroyed when the plantation house burned to the ground in 1938. No photographs of Elizabeth Caldwell have ever been located. She exists now primarily as a ghost in the historical record, glimpsed through the observations of others, her true nature and motivations a matter of speculation. If Elizabeth Caldwell did indeed create an underground railroad station beneath her plantation, operating in the heart of the Deep South at the height of slavery, she was undertaking perhaps the most dangerous form of resistance possible. The psychological toll of maintaining such a deception, presenting herself as a proper Southern widow while harboring those considered property by her society, would have been immense. Living constantly with the knowledge that discovery meant certain death requires a kind of psychological fortitude that few possess. In 1969, historian Rebecca Thornton conducted interviews with the descendants of families who had been enslaved in Montgomery County. One elderly woman whose great-grandmother had been enslaved at a plantation neighboring Willow Creek shared a story passed down through generations. "My great-grandmother used to tell about the White Witch of Willow Creek." That's what they called her. Not because she practiced magic, but because she seemed to make people disappear like magic. They said she had the face of a proper lady, but the heart of a freedom fighter. The adults would stop talking about her when children came around. It wasn't safe to know too much about the White Witch, even years after she was gone. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the Willow Creek story is what it suggests about other operations that may have existed throughout the South. Secret resistance movements never documented, risks taken that were never recorded, lives saved that were never counted. How many other Elizabeth Caldwells might there have been, working in shadows now too deep for history to penetrate? The site where Willow Creek Plantation once stood is now private farmland. Nothing remains of the original structures except for a portion of the stone foundation that once supported the main house. Local residents report that the area has an unusual quality, a stillness that feels deliberate rather than natural. Some claim to hear whispers when the wind blows through the old willows that still line the creek bank. In 1968, an archaeological team attempted to fully excavate the underground rooms, hoping to find conclusive evidence of their purpose. The project was abandoned after a series of unexplained equipment failures and the sudden illness of the lead researcher. The excavation was filled in and no further academic study has been attempted. If you visit the Alabama State Archives in Montgomery today, you can still view the tax records, shipping manifests, and other official documents that tell the public story of Willow Creek Plantation. But the private story, what happened beneath those manicured fields behind the Gentile facade, remains largely untold. Some secrets, it seems, are kept not just by people, but by places themselves. What we know with certainty is this. For a brief period in the early 1850s, a widow named Elizabeth Caldwell presided over a plantation that produced more than it should have with fewer workers than it needed. People noticed, questions were asked, and then quite suddenly those questions stopped. Elizabeth disappeared, and with her whatever truth might have explained the discrepancies in the historical record. Those who research the Willow Creek story often report a curious phenomenon, the feeling of being watched, as though the past is assessing their worthiness to receive its secrets. Perhaps that is merely the natural discomfort that comes from examining our nation's darkest period. Or perhaps it is something more, the lingering vigilance of those who once risked everything to maintain a deception upon which lives depended. In the words of Dr. Whittaker, the last entry in his journal before all mention of Willow Creek abruptly ceases. Some truths are too dangerous to commit to paper. Some secrets must be carried to the grave. I have seen what the widow has built beneath her house of lies. May God and history judge her more kindly than her contemporaries would. The Alabama River still flows past the land where Willow Creek Plantation once stood. Its waters, like time itself, carry away evidence of what transpired on its banks. But sometimes, just sometimes, the current slows enough for fragments to rise to the surface. Reminders that beneath the smooth narrative of history lie countless untold stories, waiting for someone brave enough to dive into the depths and bring them into the light. In 1958, a land survey conducted prior to the construction of a highway that would pass near the former Willow Creek property uncovered something unexpected. Approximately half a mile from the plantation's original foundation, workers discovered a series of small stone markers arranged in a pattern that made little sense until viewed from above. Aerial photography revealed that the stones formed a perfect arrow pointing north. Each stone was engraved with a single letter that, when arranged in sequence, spelled follow. The discovery might have been dismissed as coincidence had it not been for what was found beneath the final marker. Buried 3 feet underground was a metal box containing a single item, a hand-drawn map of underground waterways connecting the Alabama River to tributaries leading north toward Tennessee. The map was unsigned, but handwriting analysis later confirmed it matched samples of Elizabeth Caldwell's writing found in plantation records. The map included notations about water depths, hidden mooring points, and locations marked only as safe harbor. Most significantly, the map contained a coded message along its border that remained undeciphered until 1965, when a linguistics professor from Tuskegee University recognized it as a substitution cipher using biblical references common among abolitionists. The decoded message read, 25 souls delivered from bondage into light, more will follow. The river remembers what men choose to forget. This discovery lends credence to the theory that Elizabeth Caldwell was operating a sophisticated underground railroad station at Willow Creek, one that utilized the river system for moving escaped enslaved people northward. But it raises as many questions as it answers. How did a Southern widow with no known abolitionist connections develop such an operation? What transformed her from an apparently conventional plantation mistress into someone willing to risk everything to undermine the very system that provided her privilege? Partial answers may lie in correspondence discovered in 1964 in the attic of what had once been the home of Reverend William Parker, a northern missionary who had spent several years in Montgomery during the 1840s before returning to Massachusetts. Among Parker's papers was a letter addressed simply to E that suggests Elizabeth may have harbored abolitionist sympathies long before her husband's death. Your position remains uniquely valuable. Parker wrote in 1847, "Continue as you have been, observing all while appearing to see nothing. The time for more direct action will come. Patience in the service of righteousness is no sin." This suggests Elizabeth may have been part of an abolitionist network years before actively harboring runaway slaves, perhaps gathering information about slave catchers' movements or plantation security measures throughout the region. If so, her husband's death may have presented not a conversion moment, but an opportunity to expand activities already underway. Dr. Whittaker's journal provides another clue about Elizabeth's transformation. In an entry dated 3 months before his first recorded visit to Willow Creek after Thomas's death, he notes treating Elizabeth for injuries consistent with domestic violence. Mrs. C again presents with bruising about the face and arms. He wrote as before, she attributes this to a fall down the stairs. I am not convinced, but it is not my place to question a husband's authority in his home. This suggests Elizabeth may have had personal reasons to despise the power structures of Southern society beyond moral objections to slavery itself. The operational complexity of what Elizabeth appears to have accomplished becomes more remarkable when considered in full detail. Running an underground railroad station anywhere in the South was extremely dangerous. Doing so as a widow operating alone on a functioning plantation represents an almost unimaginable level of risk and logistical difficulty. How did she manage the daily operations of both the plantation and the hidden station? Archaeological evidence suggests the underground rooms could have housed at least 20 people at once. Feeding, caring for, and eventually moving that many fugitives while maintaining a convincing facade above ground would have required extraordinary planning and resource management. Part of the answer may lie in who Elizabeth chose to keep at Willow Creek after selling some of the enslaved workers. Records indicate she retained primarily family units rather than individuals selected for maximum field productivity, as would have been typical plantation practice. This suggests she may have been identifying people she could trust with her secret operation, particularly those with family members who had been sold away and might be attempting to escape from other plantations. The record of Elizabeth's purchases after her husband's death provides another clue. She significantly increased orders of medical supplies, preserved foods that store well, and fabric suitable for traveling clothes. She also purchased several books on riverboat navigation and regional geography, unusual reading material for a plantation mistress. Most tellingly, Elizabeth converted much of Willow Creek's cotton production to food crops within 6 months of taking control. Agricultural records show increased plantings of potatoes, beans, and corn, staples that could feed many people and be stored without attracting attention. This change was noted by neighboring plantation owners, but dismissed as feminine foolishness rather than recognized as strategic planning. The fate of those Elizabeth allegedly helped remains largely unknown. Underground railroad operations were intentionally compartmentalized, with each conductor knowing only the next stop on the route, not the ultimate destination or fate of those they assisted. This protected both the escaped individuals and the network itself if any single operator was captured. However, one remarkable document discovered in 1962 in Canadian archives may provide a glimpse. A church register from a settlement of formerly enslaved people in Ontario lists 3 families who arrived in 1851 with an unusual notation beside their names. Delivered by the River Widow. If this refers to Elizabeth Caldwell, it confirms that at least some of those she helped reached freedom. The human cost of Elizabeth's dangerous work extends beyond those she helped directly. In 1852, a year after Elizabeth disappeared from Alabama, 4 enslaved men from neighboring plantations were executed for allegedly planning an escape. Court records indicate their interrogation included questions about underground rooms and the widow's operation. Whether these men had any connection to Elizabeth's activities is unknown, but the timing suggests possible retribution against those suspected of involvement. What ultimately happened to Elizabeth herself? The historical record provides contradictory clues. A woman matching her description appears in Boston Society records in 1852 under the name Elizabeth Rivers, a surname that may have been chosen symbolically. This Elizabeth was noted for her charitable work with fugitive aid societies but maintained an unusually private life. She never married, rarely allowed her photograph to be taken, and left few personal papers when she died in 1874. Alternatively, a different theory emerged in 1966 when historian Martin Granger discovered shipping records showing a woman named Elizabeth Caldwell boarding a vessel bound for England in June 1851 from a port in Virginia. Passenger manifests indicate she traveled alone carrying 6 trunks of personal belongings. Whether this was the same Elizabeth Caldwell from Willow Creek is impossible to confirm, though the timing aligns with her disappearance from Alabama. Perhaps most intriguing is a third possibility suggested by oral histories collected from descendants of enslaved people in the Montgomery area. Several families maintain stories about a white woman who walked away from wealth and lived among free black communities in the northern states under an assumed identity. These accounts describe a woman who taught reading and writing in secret, who knew how to disappear when slave catchers came, and who carried the map of freedom roads in her head. The underground rooms themselves have yielded one final haunting piece of evidence. During the brief archaeological excavation in 1968, before the project was abandoned, researchers discovered etchings on the limestone wall of what appears to have been a sleeping chamber. The markings form a crude but recognizable tree with 25 notches cut into its trunk. Below it, carved in a different hand, are the words, "Remember us." Whether those words were left by someone passing through on their way to freedom or by Elizabeth herself as she prepared to abandon Willow Creek forever remains unknown. What is clear is that someone wanted the story remembered, wanted future generations to know that beneath the manicured lawns and white-columned facade of Southern gentility, resistance existed. People risked everything. Lives were changed. In 1959, during the early years of the Civil Rights Movement, a 96-year-old woman named Sarah Johnson was interviewed about her childhood recollections of stories told by her grandmother, who had been enslaved in Alabama until emancipation. Sarah recounted a story that had been passed down through generations. "My grandmother told about a white lady who had eyes that could see in the dark. That's how she led people through the tunnels when there wasn't no light to be had. She said this lady had been one thing on the outside and another thing on the inside for so many years that sometimes she herself didn't know which was real anymore. But the people she helped, they knew the real truth of her." The story of Elizabeth Caldwell and Willow Creek Plantation remains one of the South's most enduring mysteries. A tantalizing glimpse into the shadowy world of resistance that existed within the very heart of the slave system. If Elizabeth truly created and operated an underground railroad station beneath her own home, in plain sight of a society that would have executed her for it, she represents a particular kind of courage that history has rarely acknowledged, the courage to live a double life when the truth would be too dangerous to reveal. The site of Willow Creek Plantation today bears little resemblance to what Elizabeth would have known. The land has been divided and redivided, passed through multiple owners with no connection to its past. A small historical marker erected in 1970 makes brief mention of the plantation's existence, but says nothing of what may have happened beneath its foundations. Some histories, it seems, refuse to rest quietly. In 2002, a team of archaeologists used ground-penetrating radar to map the long-forgotten tunnel system that once stretched beneath the Willow Creek Plantation, connecting its hidden chambers to the nearby river. The scans revealed something earlier excavations had missed: a small sealed room directly beneath what would have been Elizabeth Caldwell's private study. Inside that chamber, untouched since the mid-19th century, investigators discovered a single object, a gold wedding band engraved with the words, "Until all are free." Today, that ring rests within a climate-controlled glass case in the Alabama History Museum. Its placard offers only a few sparse words: "Artifact recovered from Willow Creek Plantation. Ownership unconfirmed." Those who study the Underground Railroad often remind us that its history was written in silences, in the absence of names, in stories intentionally left untold, in acts of defiance carefully hidden from record. Its success depended on secrecy. And so, what little we know of Elizabeth Caldwell and Willow Creek comes to us in fragments, whispers, rumors, and rare artifacts that somehow escape the deliberate erasure of their own time. Perhaps that's fitting. The true weight of Elizabeth's legacy, if historians have interpreted the evidence correctly, lies not in what was written down, but in what was never recorded. There were no reports of captured fugitives at Willow Creek, no public trial, no execution of a plantation mistress accused of aiding escapees. That silence, that absence, may be her most powerful testament. As historian Rebecca Thornton observed in her 1969 analysis of the Willow Creek evidence, the most effective resistance often leaves the faintest footprint in the historical record. If Elizabeth Caldwell truly harbored those fleeing bondage beneath her plantation while maintaining her place in Southern society, her greatest triumph was ensuring her deeds would remain hidden long enough to succeed. The final piece of the puzzle surfaced in 1968 when a descendant of Dr. Samuel Whittaker discovered a false bottom inside an antique writing desk passed down through his family. Inside lay a sealed letter addressed simply to "Whoever seeks the truth of Willow Creek," dated August 18, 1865, only months after the Civil War's end. It read in part, "I have carried the burden of silence for 14 years. Now that slavery has been abolished, I can commit to paper what I witnessed without endangering those involved. Yet I shall entrust this confession to secrecy until long after my death." What followed was an extraordinary confession. Dr. Whittaker wrote that between 1849 and 1851, he had treated 25 souls in the hidden rooms beneath Willow Creek, men, women, and children who had fled bondage. Some bore the scars of brutal punishments, others were weakened by illness or exhaustion. All carried invisible wounds that no medicine could heal. Elizabeth Caldwell, he wrote, managed the operation with clinical precision. Each fugitive remained hidden only as long as necessary, usually 3 to 7 days, before being moved northward, either by river or through overland routes. She kept detailed records in a coded ledger, which she destroyed after every successful departure. The enslaved workers who remained on the plantation were not deceived by her secret. They were partners in it. Each played a role in maintaining the illusion of normalcy above ground, while the real work of liberation took place below. Elizabeth had offered them a choice after her husband's death: help her in her mission and earn their eventual freedom, or be sold to neighboring estates. According to Dr. Whittaker, not one chose to leave. He confessed that he never learned what became of Elizabeth after she sold Willow Creek and vanished, but the medical supplies she took with her suggested that her mission and her rebellion continued elsewhere. The doctor's final words carried the weight of personal transformation. "What I witnessed beneath Willow Creek changed me. I had been raised to see slavery as natural, but in those hidden rooms I saw the truth, the unbreakable will of the human spirit. Elizabeth once told me, 'Some see the world as it is and accept it. Others see the world as it should be and make it so.' She was one of the latter. The letter was signed simply S.W. and marked Philadelphia, 1865, suggesting that Dr. Whittaker himself had journeyed north after the war, and so the tale of the Alabama widow who turned her plantation into a sanctuary remains suspended between fact and legend, half documented, half whispered. The surviving fragments tell a story of courage, deception, and quiet defiance in the face of unthinkable cruelty. Yet, as with so many acts of resistance from that era, absolute proof remains elusive. Perhaps somewhere in a forgotten trunk, a sealed courthouse file, or a family Bible lies the missing piece that would confirm the truth beyond question. Until then, Elizabeth Caldwell remains a ghost at the edges of history, her true nature glimpsed only through scattered evidence and the enduring echo of what might have been. The Alabama River still flows past the former site of Willow Creek Plantation. Its waters have washed away nearly every trace of what transpired there. But some stories, once set adrift in the current of time, refuse to disappear. They resurface again and again, reminders that beneath the polished narratives of our past lie countless buried acts of bravery, compassion, and the relentless human hunger for freedom.